Thank you for joining us, where we're going to talk about the implementation of large-scale online mathematics examinations, some of the successes that we had, some of the challenges that we identified, and also we're going to present some of our thoughts for the future. So the outline of what we're going to talk about today covers our operational context. We're going to talk about the assessment design process. We're going to talk about implementation, and then of course we're going to talk about the successes, challenges and thoughts for the future that we spoke about. Now there are some caveats that we've got to add before we start the presentation. It's impossible for us to cover every point around the process that we presented. We're condensing down what happened over what is a relatively brief period of time, but for which there was significant amounts of activity. And this activity included dead ends where we had tried things and found that they were not going to be successful or had certain points that were going to cause difficulty later on down the line. So with that in mind, there are potentially going to be some questions that arise, and obviously you'll have the opportunity to ask those. So let's start with the operational context. Thought it would be useful to give an overview of the type of mathematical sciences department that we actually work in. Now, at Warwick, mathematical sciences actually covers separate departments. So unlike many other universities, there is a separate statistics department and a separate mathematical sciences department. These departments work together over this particular period to develop a uniform solution to the particular problem that we're going to be looking at. But overall, we're looking at over 2,000 mathematical sciences students, with students in other departments often taking our modules, particularly students that would be in physics, taking a lot of mathematics and statistics modules. The types of degree course that we operate include single honours mathematics, both 3-year and 4-year versions, Morse, mathematics, operational research, statistics and economics, again 3- and 4-year versions of all these degrees. We've got maths and statistics, and then maths and physics and so on. We've also got data science, discrete mathematics and a variety of other combinations within the maths plus bracket there. In terms of typical assessment, our typical assessment looks as we always use typical, but it goes to the kind of abstract that we had. 10% coursework taken during the term, and 90% is traditional closed book, time constrained written examination. The university year is term based, not semester based. So term 1 runs between October and December, term 2 runs between January and March, and then we've got term 3 which runs from April to June, which has only just completed for us. Now typically those examinations some are examined right at the start of term 2, but typically most of the examination assessment takes place in term 3, covering, as you can see, quite a few weeks. There is a small break at the end of April. So we had managed to get to around the 13th of March and got the term 1, term 2 teaching out of the way. Some teaching does take place in term 3. Now term 3 starts on the 20th of April, well it did this year, and that's when examinations were due to start. And we're going to concentrate on this period down here, which is where everything changed for us and lots of other people. In particular, we get to the 13th of March when, unsurprisingly, there was a realisation that something significant has to change around the shape of the term 3 assessment. So all assessments and examinations will be online with immediate effect. There would be no first year examinations, and all planned centrally timetabled written examinations were going to be replaced by online assessments. Now these could be assignments, these could be open book assessments, these could be file-based open book assessments. What's the difference between them? So the second one is where you've got, or provide students with the opportunity to submit significant amounts of additional files with their assessment. We've also got multiple choice questions and also spoken exam under timed conditions. Now, the approach that we took was around file-based open book assessments. We thought this gave us the greatest flexibility to address an issue that we'll talk about now in terms of the assessment design. So, I won't burden the point, but there were significant constraints in what we were trying to do. One of which was obviously time. There was 5 weeks between when this announcement came through and when first sitting was going to occur. And obviously, you've got to know what you're doing before those 5 weeks are over, so the students know what they're going to be doing. There's also constraints around academic rigour. So there's that need to maintain the internal and external quality assurance processes. And all the exams had already been written, moderated and approved by the externals. Any last minute changes are always going to start to cause potential problems around this area here when you make a minor change, potentially introduce a mistake because you're trying to do it more quickly. We also have accrediting bodies. Our programs are accredited by a variety of different bodies, one of which for the statistics modules provide professional exemptions from professional examinations, so protected qualifications. There were also technology constraints, particularly around the technology that the university already had, and GDPR and information security. We couldn't sit there and just suddenly start thinking about doing new things along with all the constraints that we have in terms of securing information. Now, I know that sounds like a strange thing to say, but the students were a constraint, or the students were constrained in some way. They were located all over the world. There are a range of different environments for them, and they also had their predefined study and assessment expectations. Because assessments start into the start of term 3, many of them had already started to prepare for the assessments as they had expected them, the closed book, time constrained written assessments. And this is where we want to spend a little bit of time today thinking about what the student side of this story and how we worked with the students around what we were doing. And in some sense, if we want to think about what we've just said, it's captured in some sense by this quote. So if I had to reduce all of educational psychology to just one principle, I would say this: the most important single factor influencing learning is what the learner already knows. And there's a whole raft of research around this, and I don't want to spend the whole of today labouring these particular points, but in some sense we're talking about evoked prior experiences, which have been spoken about as being divided into 3 separate ideas. You've got the evoked conception of learning, how the students conceive of learning in the specific context of their study, those motivational aspects that are evoked by the context, so you've got evoked motivation, and you've also got the evoked self-efficacy, the confidence students have in their ability to succeed in a specific situation. Now, there's conceptual frameworks in which you can look at evoked prior experiences, and in some sense a lot of it will say something that we would identify with. So we've got this relational model and framework of student learning, which has kind of been used to position some of the empirical work that we've seen. So we've got prior academic experiences, and then we've got overall outcomes. And in some sense you can see some of those prior academic experiences feeding directly into overall outcomes. So depending on how rigidly someone holds on to their prior academic experiences, it can influence their overall outcomes. But also you've got a student kind of centered version of that, which is aligned to the specific situation that the student finds themselves in. So, and how that will evoke particular prior experiences and their perception of the context in which they happen to be working. So everything was changing. The students don't know what's going on, and that creates uncertainty, anxiety, and we've got to try and deal with this very, very quickly. We also got if we just ignore that, the students' approaches to learning, often which, particularly when they're at the early part of their degree, are very much influenced with their prior experiences from school and how they learn within school, and then what their particular outcomes would look like in a particular situation as well. And all of that kind of feeds into what their overall outcomes are. Now, with that in mind, we've got a whole new set of ideas around what the students are thinking about. So they originally thought they were going to be on campus. They thought they were going to have some kind of social contact, either with staff or with other students. But more importantly, and there's a whole raft of different things you can put down here, but perhaps more importantly, they're expecting and preparing for a closed book, time-constrained, written exam with a known rubric. They knew what they were expecting. And if we're going to pull that rug from underneath their feet, because we've got to change what's going on, we've got to think very seriously about what the implications of that might be. And for that reason, we wanted to create a process that replicated the students' prior experiences and their current approach, and do that as smoothly and cleanly as possible, with the students having to do the smallest amount of adjustments possible so that we can still keep them in a kind of known environment and they can prepare in the way that they are. And to do that, we previously mentioned we were looking at files-based open book exam. We were looking at making very minor updates to those current papers, for example, de-emphasising the importance of bookwork. In terms of technology, we wanted to use tested and well-known technology both on our side and the technology that was going to be available to the students. Many students have had to move very quickly, particularly international students, when they realise they may not be able to get to their home country and may become unable to travel. They may have limited technology available to them. So we had to think about the absolute essentials they would have. We also wanted to work with the students on their assessment experiences, and within that context develop literacy around any changes that we were going to make, and make sure that these were transparent and clear to the students. So that's what we're going to focus on now, the student side of this story. We'll mention the staff side, but that won't be the focus of what we're talking about. So let's look at the implementation. Now, to give you some idea of the context in which we're looking at, this is the calendar of events. We've kind of set out our aims around the 16th of March, and we know that on the 20th of April, the exams are going to start. So we know that the latest deadline we could possibly set to tell students whether they had or had not been able to adapt to this process, which is something that we definitely wanted to do. We wanted to give them the opportunity to practice any changes in as close to the new fashion as possible, was 17th of April. And practically, we thought the deadline for them to submit their practice would be the 15th of April. So working backwards, we then realised that we had to have everything ready to go and be able to inform the students of everything that was going to happen and provide them with all the information so they could get going, was going to be the 9th of April. Now, by the 17th of March, we'd already gone through and tested many pieces of technology so that we could get ahead and be able to deal with the technology side of actually getting the students to give us information. So we had very quickly decided that we weren't going to ask them to do anything that changed from them writing the answers to whatever we were going to do. And to do that, we used pieces of technology that will probably be familiar to people, based around Office lenses, OneDrive, Genius Scan and Adobe Scan. And as you can see here, what comes from that is the ability to scan a piece of paper. It does some post-processing to make it all look nice and clear for the person who's then got to mark it. So this is the only change that we had implemented in terms of asking the students to do something different. Now, that's what came, the choice of the different ones there came from some of the interfaces and discussions we had with students, which is why on the 18th we had recruited some students and we aimed to get some initial feedback from them by the 20th of March, because we wanted to be able to tell students, whilst not necessarily being able to give them all the details, by the Monday what our overall aim was in terms of delivering the assessments that were going to happen in April, on the 20th of April. So what did we do in terms of that implementation? Well, we quickly wrote a proper practice exam. So we recruited students across the later years, the 3rd and 4th years, and we gave them a 2nd year exam. So we just wanted to see how they did. So it's a real exam. We wanted them to do it under time constrained conditions. We gave them some draft instructions about how to use the technology, about what we were going to ask them to do. We asked them to complete the paper under proper conditions, talk about some of the distractions or anything else or difficulties that they faced. We asked them to submit the paper, and we asked them for their feedback on the process. Now, when you're looking at complete the paper there, we'll mention something later on. Do not underestimate that when students are outside of the normal environment, the types of unusual distractions and things that you wouldn't normally think about that can occur during this particular process. Someone next door drilling next to the room that you're trying to do it in, for example. And they provided us with very significant amounts of feedback around a number of different areas, how the quality of the scan, how easy the apps were to use, basically exporting things to a PDF. We wanted everything in a PDF format so that we knew what we could do with it. Anything about using the VLE, which was Moodle for us. And we got a lot of feedback around this, and this was very, very useful. And we had further discussions with them, and we reached this particular point by the Friday. This gave us some time to sit there and digest what they'd said to us and think about next steps. Now, what really came out of this was don't change too much. So we developed a online assessment guide which covered, for example, preparing for these assessments, what a time assessment will look like. Now, the assessments were going to look as follows. The students were going to have a 24-hour window because they're all over the world. The assessments were still timed, so they start it anywhere within that window and they have 2 hours to do it, plus extra time if it's applicable. And then they have 45 minutes to prepare their submission using some of the recommended apps. And then a random sample were selected for a post-exam sampling conversation. That's what the exam process was going to look like. And then we've got various other parts and instructions around what the shape of the assessment is going to look like. In particular, we spent a lot of time looking at alternatives to using the apps that we had spoken about there, and we basically set what the expectations were for the work that they were going to submit so they could practice doing that. And we developed instructions across a range of different hardware and technological pieces. So once we'd done that, we were in the position to release this practice on the 9th of April, which was a mathematical sciences online assessment practice page, which gave them detailed instructions about how the assessment was, the specifics of what it was going to work. We'd already spoken about this to the students. We'd set what a particular assessment would look like. They could submit it. We gave them examples about how to construct it. And this involved over 1,500 students who submitted these pages. They were given feedback against 11 criteria. The reason we did this was to make sure that the work that we got in, we could actually deal with. So that we could actually read it, we could actually mark it properly, we could go through our side of the assessment process without causing any difficulties for the students where we simply couldn't process their work. And they were given individualised feedback against the criteria with suggested changes. Now, of course, we've got 11 criteria. It was either you've done it or you haven't. And of course, one of the reasons we wanted to do a practice was this is a change and everyone wants to know how successful the students were at meeting these new criteria. Here you go. So only 10% of the initial submissions managed to meet all 11 criteria initially. And if you're very quick at adding up, you'll realise that actually 366 students didn't actually submit a practice submission by the deadline that we gave. Now, we left the portal open so that they could continue to submit, and we guarantee that we give feedback by a particular deadline into April. And before everyone worries, not everyone had exams, of those 1,500 had exams starting in April. So we then managed to reduce that down to 163, no submissions. Now for the live papers, the issues were small both relatively and absolutely. The two big ones were things that came in landscape and what we've called big submissions. Now that may not make much sense, but essentially if someone uses their native mobile phone app and uses a native mobile phone app to export something to a PDF, the way that it deals with the pixel conversion when you run it through a PDF annotator on a VLE can often mean that it's zoomed into such an extent that you can see basically just you really struggle to actually see what the whole page looks like. And those problems all arose from those that didn't complete the practice, which demonstrates why we wanted to do it. On the staff side, there's a whole another raft of things that were going on, but essentially we developed a preparation, marking, moderating, finalising workflow using Teams, Planner and Flow. Marking was done on Moodle. You can see an example of a faked, okay, that's not a real submission, fake submission there. And as soon as we knew that we were going to have this new set of problems, we invested in tablets at the start and we tested and iterated this process with staff volunteers. So now we've gone through and done that, and we can look back. What are some of the successes, challenges and thoughts for the future? So one of the successes that people will often forget was that thousands took examinations, they were marked and they went to exam boards. I think that's pretty impressive given the time scales, and this would have happened in universities all over the world, and most people will forget it. Working with students, that new approach worked very, very well. It was informative and helpful for both us and the students. Feedback from our students, particularly those taking MORS, has shown that any deviation from the expectations was difficult for the students to manage, increased their stress and also their anxiety. The number of difficulties we've had where the assessment was designed and expectations were changed even slightly from the fundamentals is amazing. And we learn a lot about improving our future practices as well. Challenges. It worked, but on our side, the PDF interface on the VLE is missing important features, delete, lasso, and so on. Some of those really do need some work, and that really increased marking time. Some people might question what the outcomes look like. Well, can you tell which of these is from this year? And I guarantee you've probably got it wrong. But I'm not going to tell you which it is, but I guarantee people will normally select the wrong one out of those. One of those is from this year on a module, but you'll probably select the wrong one. So outcomes seem to be okay, but there is a challenge around maintaining academic integrity, which is why we had the sampling conversations. Thoughts of the future. We used minimal technology. We thought that people having access to a computer and a mobile phone or something like that was a fairly minimal set of technology implications, and we're thinking about that for the future. That's how our assessment and teaching and learning design is going forward into next year. There's still debate, which we're trying to deal with, where people have got the idea that open book means it must be harder, and that's a big debate that's going to have to be had. And it's challenging to have that with some people. Also, do not underestimate the challenges that some of the students will have and will face. They will have challenges that you will not think about. And I think that's really important as we move forward. But with that, that completes the outline of what we were looking at today. So I think it's probably worthwhile opening it up for questions. Thank you.